This conversation, yeah, sometimes you go in with like a pre-assumed idea of what someone's going to say or how they're going to act, and then the reality plays out completely differently, and it's so different to what you had in mind. Well, it's just kind of awesome. And that was what happened here in this conversation with Martin Ball. Martin is a scholar, an educator, and the author of multiple books on the subject of psychedelics, as well as a series of fiction. He's a well-known speaker on the psychedelic scene, and he's been boots on the ground talking publicly about these substances and their benefits since the early 2000s at many big-name events. In addition to all that, he's a musician, podcast host, probably a zillion other things. But the thing I would say he's most well known for is his work with 5-MeO-DMT and his experience with non-duality, which is why I wanted to talk to him. You know, I've often been seen as someone who is critical of the God experience, which is associated with non-duality. Non-duality meaning one, like everything is one, and one could say is God. Now, I have zero problem with that label, and I've used it myself in my videos, along with other terms such as oneness, the universal consciousness, the face of creation, or whatever poetic language I come up with to describe that ineffable, fundamental thing that you experience within these deep psychedelic states. You know, so if someone wants to call that God, I'm fine with it, and I totally get it. In the non-dual world, because all is God, then everything is God. You, me, my daughter's hamster, YouTube, this is all just an expression of the universe, of God. And yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. And like I've said many times, personally, I don't really care what the explanation is behind all this psychedelic weirdness. The problem I have around the God label comes with the extra bits that sometimes get bolted on by some of the more eccentric people within the psychedelic community. And this typically involves paranormal woo-woo or spooky bullshit. So does this mean that the non-dual experience always leads to this kind of delusional thinking? I mean, do I even fully understand what non-duality is? I mean, I thought I did based on my experiences, but you know, I wasn't having these thoughts that everything is imaginary and felt like I'm manifesting reality like some guys talk about. So, with all this in mind, I thought the best thing to do would be to speak to someone who's an expert in this non-dual space. And that's what brought me to Martin Ball. Martin is, in my opinion, the daddy of non-duality in the psychedelic discourse. And so I figured if anyone could answer my questions, then he was the man for the job. And honestly, I thought we were going to disagree on pretty much everything. But the reality is that there is very little daylight between us. And this is what I mean when I talked about my preconceptions. Because as I discovered here, Martin is incredibly grounded and very friendly and can explain his position extremely clearly within a couple of minutes. And on top of that, he was just an awesome dude. So don't be put off by the terminology of God, because this conversation is personally certified by me as being bullshit free. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So without further ado, I bring you Martin Ball.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. Yeah.
No, thank you, mate, for making the time. It's a pleasure to talk to you. So I always think a good place to start is if just you could just like briefly introduce yourself and just a very quick summary of your work, just in your own words, just for my audience.
Okay, yeah. My name's Martin, like you said, and I've been involved sort of in the quote unquote psychedelic renaissance for quite some time, kind of going back to 2006 with the publication of my book, Mushroom Wisdom. But also back in 2008, I started my own podcast, the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. And, you know, at the time, there was only like a small handful of podcasts about psychedelics that existed in the world. Now, you know, they're everywhere. There's hundreds of different podcasts. So, you know, it's kind of early on in the whole modern psychedelic renaissance. And I've published a number of books since then. I'm kind of really best known for my work with 5-MeO-DMT, but I've also published books about Salvia divinorum. I already mentioned Mushroom Wisdom. I'm also a novelist. I've written 6 novels, all of which are psychedelic novels, including, you know, the ingestion of psychedelics within the novels themselves. And I'm someone who underwent really a rather profound process of awakening and transformation, which was largely facilitated by 5-MeO-DMT and also augmented by ayahuasca and salvia divinorum. And that was back in 2008 and 2009. And pretty much ever since then, I have promoted what I call a radical non-dual approach to psychedelics and psychedelic experience, and also have called that the entheological paradigm, which is basically a worldview that I have developed out of my own experiences. So it's a non-dual perspective, but it doesn't come out of any non-dual traditions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, or Taoism, or it's something that I developed on my own. So there's some differences there, and also I organized the Exploring Psychedelics conference here in Ashland, Oregon for 5 years. It was the only conference about psychedelics north of San Francisco in the United States for a number of years. And now, again, this is another area where now there's a lot more conferences taking place. So I've kind of been a pioneer in this area. And I'm also a musician and an artist. And I also practiced as an underground psychedelic therapist for 7 years, working with 5-MeO-DMT. These days, I just offer consultations for people. So I don't actively do medicine sessions with people. And I call it non-dual entheogenic integration, helping people understand what's going on in their psychedelic experiences from a non-dual perspective. And also, still active, giving talks and interviews, throughout coronavirus, been doing like online conferences and things like that. And
you keep busy, mate. Got your fingers in a few pies there.
Yeah.
I mean, I just out of interest, what's that been like for yourself then? Because you have sort of, like I mentioned, you are a bit of a pioneer here, and you have been there through the sort of the early days, and as we've seen sort of, what's been referred to as a psychedelic renaissance explode, and we've seen technology kind of explode with it, which is, enables things like this. So sort of what's your sort of take there? Are we in a sort of like a better place at the moment, or is there all like sort of almost too much information out there that's becoming noise, or what's your take?
Oh, I think that we're much better informed now than when I started doing all of this. And actually, when my book Mushroom Wisdom came out in 2006, everything that I've done except for that book has been self-published, but that was published by a publisher. And in 2006, she was saying like, people aren't really writing about psychedelics anymore, so we don't know if there's going to be much of a market for this. And actually, it's only increased since then. So, there had been sort of a dying off of interest in psychedelics in popular culture and scientifically speaking and medically speaking and all of that. But I think it's just exploded since then. And now we see university departments putting together departments of psychedelic studies and psychedelic medicine and psychedelic therapy training programs. Here in Oregon, just this year, we just passed the ballot initiative to legalize psilocybin-based therapy in Oregon, which is just revolutionary. We also decriminalized all drugs. And then also, when I started my podcast and, in particular, talking about 5-MeO-DMT, almost no one had ever heard of it. And something that was quite controversial at the time that I was getting on my podcast and saying, everybody's excited about DMT, but DMT is basically the kiddie pool compared to 5-MeO-DMT. And it really pissed a lot of people off, that people didn't like that because they hadn't heard of it. They didn't know what the difference was. And also, I was one of these people who first really started talking about non-duality within a psychedelic context. And there was also a lot of pushback against that. But now 5-MeO-DMT is something that is now known around the world. And people actually use the phrases that I first introduced, that I first started calling it the God molecule and the crown jewel of entheogens. And I now see that around the world, people call it that. And people are having conversations about non-duality and psychedelics all around the world. And we have far more scientific studies and papers that are being done, and it's much more acceptable in a university context. And even, my area, my PhD is in religious studies. And when I was a graduate student in religious studies at University of California, Santa Barbara, back in the late 90s, I think psychedelics maybe came up twice in different classes that I had, which is absurd because you can talk about virtually any religion, and particularly the more you get into history, that psychedelics, cannabis, mushrooms, all of these things have been involved in religions for thousands and thousands of years. And there's much more widespread knowledge and also documentation about all of this. And so it's changing in academic settings, it's changing within culture itself. So I think that basically, I think the wave is broken, that it was kind of a trickle of change, but I think now change is going to be coming much more rapidly. And I think that we're much better positioned for it. And I think that we're in a time and a place where we need it more than ever. Living through dictatorships and autocrats and wannabe dictators and coronavirus and anti-science and, just all the craziness that we've been living through. That
I think is definitely a strange time. Yeah, it's bizarre. But yeah, I mean, I think along with everything that you just said, that acceptance has kind of shifted as well. Which I think people are now more receptive to hearing this, whereas before it was, when I was a kid, it was always, take psychedelics and throw yourself off a building, and now there's this kind of a much more academic discussion. So yeah, there's something in the wind there. But yeah, and I just wanted to sort of the reason I wanted to get in touch was really around the non-dual aspect of what you do. Yeah. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on myself. So I read your book, Entheogenic Liberation, and I've sort of experienced most of the main psychedelics like you talked about, so DMT, 5-MeO, ayahuasca, psilocybin, various others. And so I've had similar experiences as what you described in your books. So hopefully we've got a kind of a common foundation for this conversation, even if some of the conclusions we might not necessarily agree on. Yeah. And the reason I wanted to broach this topic is I did a video it was about 9 months ago, and where I was kind of critical of some ideas put out there by another psychonaut who was, again, very in this kind of non-dual camp. But specifically, it was because of some of these conclusions that they came to as a result of the non-duality equals this, and it was specifically going into stuff like sort of paranormal abilities and unlock sort of psychic powers and things like that, which I'm not particularly interested in. I was a bit dismissive of. So, but when I put that video out, the pushback I got was that people thought I was dismissing the entire idea of non-duality, where I wasn't. I was just kind of dismissing these particular conclusions. But I do sort of definitely have a few questions around the outcomes of the kind of non-dual mindset, and I'd like to sort of get into that later. But I just want to say from the day, I absolutely do acknowledge that there is an experience there to be had, and that it's something that can be immensely valuable. And I figure if I'm going to talk to someone and sort of challenge my own ideas on this, then I figured I may as well talk to the person who literally wrote the book. So here we are, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do so. So I think I'd like to start off with just talking through some of the stuff that you raise in the book. Sure. Entheogenic Liberation, and I just wanted to say first off, I do really enjoy the bluntness of the book, because you very much sort of tell it like it is, which is something that kind of us from the north of England, we're sort of renowned for talking very bluntly. So it was very refreshing to see it sort of spelled out so clean. But I can imagine I think, well, as you just mentioned, it's not something that everyone takes easily. I mean, what was the overall reception like when you put out that book?
Well, with Entheogenic Liberation, it's honestly, it's been my best-selling book ever since I put it out, and it really, I think it's considered like the 5-MeO DMT handbook or manual, and it comes out of 7 years of experience of serving people 5-MeO DMT. So it's not like it's a speculative work for me, and I'm pretty certain about the things that I assert, and so I don't put a lot of fluff in there. I just this is the way it is. I would say that when I first started sort of on this trajectory, the book that I wrote was Being Human, and that was back in 2009, and that I definitely received a lot of pushback from, and people were very reactive. Where basically there was two sets. There was one set of people would read it and say, "Oh my God, this guy's onto something," I think this might be it. And then the other side was just like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? What? I mean, I literally got, messages from people saying that like this, the one that stands out, this guy said, like, I read the book and I loved it so much that I gave it to my girlfriend and she got so mad she threw the book across the room at me. I was like, yeah, that kind of sums up how people have taken my work. But see, by the time of writing Entheogenic Liberation, which came out in 2017, I have not backed down. I have kind of taken my position and I've made it very public. I've done it on my podcast and on my talks. And so, I think people kind of know where I'm coming from. So I haven't really, if there are people critical of Entheogenic Liberation, they haven't felt compelled to let me know. Whereas when I wrote Being Human, man, they definitely felt compelled to let me know what they thought if they were.
And what was it? What was it? Was it just the audacity of you speaking out, or was there a specific thing they had an issue with?
Yeah, in part it is just the audacity of just me writing this short book that basically says, look, this is the nature of reality. I'm going to tell you what it is. And that, I have my PhD in religious studies. I've studied a lot of religions and I am not religious. I characterize myself as non-religious and non-spiritual. And that's been a big part of the psychedelic renaissance, has been the spiritualizing of psychedelics and the ritualized use of psychedelics. And I think that there's a place for that. But ultimately, I think that it's limited. That I think just following an ayahuasca tradition is limited. I think that making rituals is limited, and that I think that the fullness of what it means to be a human being is actually to transcend and go beyond that. And that was actually the theme of my novel Beyond Azara that I wrote in 2014. It's a fantasy science fiction book, but it's all about going beyond the doctrines, going beyond the beliefs of any particular community. And a basic distinction that I make between my view of the non-dual entheological paradigm is I say it's not the shamanic worldview. And that's the shamanic worldview is that, there are entities and spirits and other realms and that you can contact this stuff. And I have very strongly come out and said, no, these are all projections of the self that are operating at an egoic level, and that you can actually go beyond that. And so, people who are invested in those traditions, they're offended by that in the same way that if you tell someone that their religion is illusory and delusional, beliefs that are more closely tied to someone's sense of self-identity, they're going to hold on to those more, and they're going to be more offended and more triggered by someone challenging those beliefs. And they're also going to be more resistant to counterfactual information that presents them with an alternative view. And so, I've certainly encountered a lot of that. And I've been quite brash and brazen and very authoritative in, my presentation. And so I don't leave a lot of gray area in how I discuss things. And that's also a cultural tendency of let's respect everybody's view and everybody's perspective has value and all sides are equal and no one really knows. And it's just like, I don't buy into that. And I did. It's important to note that I did buy into that. But in going through this process myself, I came out the other end with kind of this, oh shit, I think my view is actually quite different from that. And if I'm going to be true to myself, I need to express that. And that, I definitely trigger people. I set people off. And, I don't read reviews on Amazon. But certainly people tell me, they tell me that the reviews are either, oh my God, this is the best book ever, or just, what a piece of garbage, this is terrible, so people,
that's the world we live in. It's the binary. Everything either sucks or it's awesome. There's no middle ground anymore to anything.
Everything's so polarized. It's terrible.
But how do you sort of reconcile that then? Because I mean, I think one thing we can sort of agree on is that this psychedelic experience, it is very hard to say this is like absolute fact to it. I mean, there is a fact that we are having the experience, but because then there's the potential there for someone who's had a religious experience. They can say, well, my thing's just as valid as yours, or someone who says, the absolute militant atheist who will say, well, absolutely, there's nothing, and I know that because textbook said so. And so, I mean, there must be a sort of a point where you can sort of acknowledge that, okay, well, this is, you are wholeheartedly believe this, what you are saying, but is it not a bit of a stretch to say like it's like a provable fact across everything, or?
Well, that's where the non-dual experience itself is really the center point. That's the key to all of this. So I'll
tell you what, just before you saw the goal there, just for the benefit of the audience, can we just define it? What do we mean by non-duality? Because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I think sometimes it gets misapplied along with stuff like ego death and stuff like that. So and I realize when we're talking about the non-dual experience, the words completely start falling over. But just for the benefit of the audience, what do you mean when we talk about non-duality?
Yeah, so the non-dual experience is the experience of the complete transcendence of subject-object duality. And so that's why it's called non-duality, because everything that we ever experience, aside from the non-dual experience, is a dualistic experience. Mm-hmm. There is a sense of self, there is a sense of other, there's a sense of this is me, there's a sense of that is not me. There is a subject, there is an object to it. And that the non-dual experience is the transcendence of that, meaning that there is no longer a divide between subject and object. There no longer is a divide between what you think of as yourself and what you think of as not yourself. And more importantly, it's an experience, right? That it's not an idea, it's not a concept, it's not something that you can either believe or not believe in. It's an experience that you have. Mm-hmm. And that experience itself puts your dualistic experiences into perspective. So kind of an analogy that I like to use is when we're dreaming, we're in a dream space, and it's really funny because most of the time in a dream space, all the normal laws of physics seem to apply, right? Mm-hmm. There's gravity, we're walking through an environment, there's objects, and, things can get weird in dreams, but in the dream, for the most part, we believe the reality of what we're experiencing. And then, when we wake up later, we say, oh, that was a dream. But at the time, mm-hmm. we thought it was real. But also within a dream, there's a potential for a lucid dream where you become aware in the dream that you're dreaming. And at that point, you wake up within the matrix, quote unquote, where when you're dreaming, it's like, oh, this is a dream. So the normal laws of physics don't apply. I can fly around if mm-hmm. I want to. For example, I can breathe underwater if I have to, or if I want to. So that we become aware that actually we were enmeshed in what we thought was a reality. But then we get a perspective that where we're kind of looking outside of it and realizing, okay, this is actually a construct. This is a product of my mind. This is not really happening. So I can bend the rules and I can do other things here within this. And so the non-dual experience is kind of like that for reality as a whole, that you go beyond your normal dualistic experiences. And keeping in mind that I also classify like 99% of all psychedelic experiences still reside within the realm of a dualistic. And then from the non-dual perspective, you can then recognize like, oh, these things that I thought were separate and real actually were products of my own mind, that they were products of consciousness that I was perceiving and interacting with in that space, but actually they don't exist independently of me, that they're a construct of me at one level.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I mentioned that it gets thrown around a lot, because I completely agree with everything you said there. And there are categories of a psychedelic experience. I think there are some which are just purely psychedelic, or some which take on this kind of like sci-fi storyline, narrative to it. And then there's, ones going through sort of mystical experiences, and then I think like the full sort of non-dual experiences where I found that the non-dual words, along with a few others, get thrown around very, very liberally, and everyone's So everyone's had ego deaths and everyone's had non-dual experiences, and I think it's a subset of the landscape of psychedelic experience. And I think there's a phrase in your book which I absolutely loved when you were talking about 5-MeO DMT as a way to get there, which is the tryptamine molecular express, which I thought was just an awesome way of kind of reliably getting to this non-dual state. But I just wanted to kind of pick your brains a little bit about what the boots on the ground sort of situation in regards to non-duality is, in terms of like, what does it mean for our existence as human beings? Because there's a couple of bits you just mentioned there I just want to try and unpack. So first off, you mentioned that this is an experience. This is something to be experienced. So in that case, kind of crap analogy might be, it's kind of skydiving. You skydive, you had the experience of skydive. Once you've had it, you cannot unskydive. It's done.
Yeah.
But then again, the analogy then the other that gets used is that of sort of waking up, and people tend to use this as it is a permanent transition of states. And so you wake up into sort of and then you are aware of non-duality. So is this something whereby once you've, and again, a lot of these questions I'm being sort of devil's advocate just to sort of try and pass out your stance here. So sure. Is it something where are you woken up into this now permanent non-dual state, or is this only happening, the non-duality is only happening within the boundaries of the psychedelic experience?
Yeah. So I describe it generally as it's a temporary phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that it's something that you get access to, and then you're there for a period of time, in a sense. Well, you're not there because you are gone. and it's just, see, that's the thing, is that it just is, that when the ego fully gets out of the way, it's just what is. But within the psychedelic experience, it's always a temporary phenomenon. So with 5-MeO DMT, it has the potential to start within a number of seconds, right? You take a hit of 5-MeO, and if someone is able to fully let go of their ego, then it just starts happening. Mm-hmm. And then in some cases, the ego comes back within a number of seconds. Mm. And then in other cases, the ego is transcended for maybe up to 15 to 20 minutes. And then the energy of 5-MeO starts to die down, and then the ego comes back online. And then the person says, oh, I woke up, I regained consciousness, I came back into my body, I came back into reality. So it's a temporary suspension of the ego. And that, for me, the value of it is that, first of all, it informs you of who and what you are at your truest and deepest nature. And here the language that I use is, guess what, everybody? You're God. Mm-hmm. And by that, I am not speaking religiously. I'm not talking from any religious tradition. By God, I mean that in reality, there is actually only one consciousness. There is one being. There is one consciousness that is made of the infinite energy of unconditional love. And that it is all of reality, that being is reality itself. Mm-hmm. And that from the human perspective, we are two different versions of this one being interacting with and experiencing itself from two different perspectives simultaneously. And that's just what reality is. And that it's not an achievement to have a non-dual experience. It's a falling away of the constructed identity and of our normalized perspective as an individuated expression of this universal consciousness. And so in that sense, it's verifiable. It's not verifiable from outside, but each person can have this experience where, so again, going back to what is my definition of the non-dual experience, the full non-dual experience is not, I was with God, or I felt I was part of the infinite. The full non-dual experience is a recognition of, holy shit, that's me. I am reality. I am God. And that's not the ego talking. That is just the self-identification talking, the self-awareness talking. And so it's a temporary experience. And no, no one's enlightened from their 5-MeO-DMT experience.
Yes.
That you don't, it's not like, it's not, what I like to say is like, look, it's magical. It's amazing, but it's not magic. You can't just smoke 5-MeO-DMT and then after that it's like, boom, I'm enlightened and liberated.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't work that way, because enlightenment and liberation is a process of unwinding yourself from the constructs of your ego, which doesn't mean living without an ego. It actually means living with your ego in a healthy way that is grounded in clarity and grounded in reality, versus an ego that has not gone through this process, is confused and is attached to its beliefs and its projections and its habits and its unconscious modes of operation. So as a process, I mean, that's why the subtitle to Entheogenic Liberation is Unraveling the Enigma of Non-Duality, meaning that it's something that takes time to unravel, like what the fuck does this really mean, and what's the value of all this? And then with 5-MeO-DMT energetic therapy, and I use the word therapy because therapy is not a one-off thing, right? Mm-hmm. Therapy means it's an ongoing process of deeper and deeper learning and deeper actualizing of yourself in your true authentic form. And so for me, the upshot of all of this is not so that you can just go live in oneness all the time and just everything's perfect, it's so awesome. That's not the point. The point is actually learning how to be the individual that you are in a way that is free from the ways that you have limited yourself, the ways that you have edited yourself and censored yourself and judged yourself. And then that also applies to how you're dealing with yourself at the exterior level of other people, of objects, of reality itself. So it's a way to live in clarity so that you can simply just be the person that you are without the continual editing and self-criticism and doubt and judgment that just plagues humanity, especially the modern Western mind is just plagued by this shit. And
tell me about it, mate. You don't have to convince me.
So 5-MeO-DMT, I say it's a tool to help this process along, and it's an exemplary tool, but it's just a tool. So smoking 5-MeO-DMT, and then people say, "Oh, I'm enlightened now." Well, that usually wears off after the next 15 minutes, and then their ego fully comes back, and they're like, "Oh, no, I'm just back to being me, but I really felt enlightened a few minutes ago." This is a common response that people have. So that's why I say it's about learning to work with it, because look, people have got all kinds of repressed energy stuck in their bodies, and that's because their ego has blocked them from expressing themselves genuinely for social reasons, religious reasons, political reasons, whatever. People are constructs of themselves. They're not really authentic. The way that I describe it is that, look, the ego is just a character that God is playing through your body, through my body. But without the non-dual experience, we identify fully with the character and we think, oh, I am that character. So we are limited by that character. But when you really enter into the non-dual, then you realize, oh, I actually am this infinite being that is everyone and everything in all places and all times, which is then channeled through the character that I'm playing. So I am both infinite and I'm also the character that I'm playing. So how do I play the character in a way that is most in alignment with what is authentic and true and real? And that for me is what liberation is. It's not about floating off to cloud 9. It's not about being high all the time. It's not about, just what we also see a lot of is just this spiritual bypassing of people say, well, I experienced that actually everything is perfect. So it means everything is perfect, including all the troubles that I have in my life and all the things that I dislike, that those are perfect too. So I just have to be happy and nice all the time. And I have to love everyone, even when they do terrible, nasty things to me. And that's just a form of spiritual bypassing. That's a way that beliefs get in the way of, actually being present with reality.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of toxic sort of positivity of this sort of, Yeah, everything is awesome and nothing can be challenged. And you just, if there's got any sort of criticism of anything, then you're just an asshole. And I think
Yeah.
that it ties in as well with something which sort of is one of my bugbears is this kind of element of like drive-through spirituality, whereby someone does do something, whether it's sort of like an ayahuasca retreat or or a 5-AMO experience, and then that's it, done, and they are enlightened and stuff like that. And I wanted to sort of one of the points I wanted to try and unpack with you, because I don't disagree with your sort of your definition of sort of God and how that sort of or even the use of the word God in terms of this non-dual experience, but it does then feed into this kind of problem that I've just mentioned, whereby because you can have one of these experiences, and these experiences are just so gobsmackingly awesome that it does just knock most people on their ass. And then the language is there, the terminology is there around God, and I think it's easy to see where that ego inflation can come from, because particularly if there are people with it's a weird sort of paradigm, because the people who are after ego death are usually the ones who need their ego strengthening, because their ego is so weak that they just start accepting crazy bullshit. So I think I probably know your answer here, because the God word is just like the right word. There's no other word for it. It is God. That's that. But do you see? Is there a problem there in that it does feed into this kind of? It can very easily end up as something ugly, I think. And I wonder if you had any thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, that kind of really points back to the idea that I really like to emphasize the process, that it's not about a one-off experience, and that the ego can definitely co-opt the experience. And there are just so many ways that it can happen, So one of the things that can happen is that when you experience that you're God, that then you come back in your ego says, yeah, that's right, and it's me. And so I'm the authority and it's me. But see, it's like, no. Your ego is just a character that God is playing. Okay. So yes, it's you, but it's not your ego. And then, yeah, some people, they actually do need their ego strengthened, again, because it's about living with a healthy ego. And it's kind of like accepting that you're incredibly special, but everybody's incredibly special, so that actually then you're not incredibly special. And so that there's this kind of inequality of the elitism of it. And so it's very ironic that way, that it's like, oh, I am that. And that can make the ego feel really special. But then you always have to remember, and so is everyone else. Everybody else is also that.
Yeah, it should be a humbling experience, I think, because I think it's the way I tend to think of it is that you are realizing that the universe is special, and that you have this kind of place within the universe, and so and everything shares this kind of same status, and it's and the vastness of it is just magnificence, magnificence in its vastness, and so there is this simultaneous feeling of humility balanced with sort of I don't know, like sort of responsibility and sort of, again, knowing your place. But there is this very definite balance, and I think that a lot of people, for that, it goes completely out, and they become absorbed by that experience and absorbed by the sort of the sort of the terminology. And I think, like what you said, when the ego comes back, it does grab its claws into that and just doesn't want to let go of it, and doesn't want to get back to the thing. Go, actually, no, you are a human being, and you are going to have to go and take a shit in the next 24 hours. So it's dial it down a bit, dude.
Yeah, I think fortunately in a lot of cases that wears off. That can be kind of the first few days or even the first few months after a 5-MeO experience, but then eventually, all the unconscious habits of the ego reassert themselves, and then people find themselves back down in the same shit. And then the ego adds another layer and then starts criticizing themselves for like, oh, you fell back down, you were in this exalted state, and now look at, you're back, and now you're bad and you can't do it, you've done it wrong. And then another aspect of this that's terribly ironic, which I definitely encounter a lot in the consultations that I do with people, is that having a non-dual experience, and even when it's really humbling, as you say, that then people can also, ironically, after having this experience of being, oh, wow, I'm actually everyone and everything, that then they ironically feel more isolated than ever in their lives, because suddenly they've had this experience that when they talk to other people's egos are like, oh, you can't say that you were God, or that you experienced God, or, people don't understand them. And that, it's the phrase that gets used is this ontological shock, that kind of, you get the rug ripped out from underneath you. Like for me personally, my first full 5-MeO DMT experience, keeping in mind that I had a couple experiences prior that were not the full deal, but when I got the full deal, it was just within seconds. I was a self-described atheist, okay? And within seconds, it's like, oh my God, it's God. What? Oh my God. And then I was just so overcome with gratitude. I was just for like 45 minutes, I was just, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So it was a shock. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I've been there, man. I had a similar thing, and I was like, okay, yeah. Yesterday I was this. Like, what do I do with that now? It's because you cannot. Sometimes you cannot unbelieve stuff. I mean, there's just no mechanism. You can't, like, say, if you get thrown out of an airplane, you cannot unexperience the skydive. It's fucking happening. Get over it, dude. So yeah. And there was a great. I just want to say there was a great bit I liked in your book where you was recommending against couples doing this as some sort of like relation, something to boost the relationship, because it can just sort of drastically knock you out of sync with each other. And it's something I've strongly sort of recommended for. Is like, yeah, if you planning on doing, probably most psychedelic things, this is not a group activity. It's not a relay couples activity. I don't think it's a. It's because one of you can end up having the time of their life, and the other one can end up in some introspective nightmare, which just doesn't gel well as part of a couple.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I cut you off there. What are you going to say, mate?
No, it's quite all right. Yeah, definitely results vary, and that's another thing that I thought from my first full 5-MeO DMT experience. I mean, it was the pure full non-dual experience. It was infinite consciousness, infinite love. I mean, it was just. I now like to use the term of like, that was an experience of grace, that it was just grace. And I thought, at the time, oh, you give people enough 5-MeO DMT and this is what happens. But then I learned really quickly, no, that's not the case at all, because there's so many different ways that the ego can hold on or resist or fight, and that some people are ready to let go all the way. And then other people have a lot of unwinding, and they have a lot of self-hate or self-loathing or fear that they have to confront within themselves before they can release all the way. And then a lot of people who get a really big, open, beautiful experience of grace the first time, then the next time, all the shit of their ego shows up. And then it gets much, much harder for them. And then they have a lot of unwinding that they have to do. And so again, it's sort of emphasizing the process, and that I always tell people also that, this is true of psychedelics in general, but more so of 5-MeO, because it has this potential to really take you all the way. That don't take it if you're not prepared for the fact that it might really fundamentally change your life. Not because you're going to come out and suddenly, oh, I'm enlightened, but that you start to become aware of where you're propping up your life for reasons that are not really authentic and true, but because it's safe, or because you've been hiding, or because you're afraid of something. And so that's why, like, I say, well, look, it's not couples therapy, because actually a lot of people are in like codependent relationships. They're in unhealthy relationships. Maybe the relationship was over years ago, but they haven't admitted to themselves. And then they take 5-MeO, and it's kind of like the ultimate truth serum, where suddenly they realize, oh, I actually don't want to be with this person anymore. Or it could be, I don't want to be in my job anymore. Or I'm not happy with the direction my life has been taking, that I've been,
I don't want to be me anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to be me anymore. And then it can even, again, ironically, it can increase self-loathing. See, that's why, again, you have to pay attention to the process, that it gives you the opportunity to work on all of these things and potentially really transform these aspects of your life. But that takes work. That takes being a human being in the messiness. And it's not just, oh, I need to check out again. Oh, I need to do that again so I can get out. It's actually more about, it's this process of uncovering deeper and deeper layers of where you've hidden the truth from yourself. And that can be extraordinarily uncomfortable. It can be really messy, with lots of purging and screaming and yelling and crying and defecating and urinating and orgasms, and the list goes on and on. But it's a process. And it's definitely, for a lot of people with 5-MeO, they take it once and they say, damn, I don't think I ever need to do that again. But if you really want to work with it, actually, it's a process, and you don't get the full package of what the potential is with just one experience. That it's because the ego is incredibly resilient, which is both a good and a bad thing. That it holds on to its illusions really, really well. It holds on to its unconscious patternings really, really well. But it's also the features through which we have all normal social interaction. And we're social beings. We live in a social world. We don't want to all be isolated from each other. So our egos are necessary. They're good in that respect. But they do tend towards confusion. They do tend towards wanting to believe things. The ego is kind of a meaning addict. It wants everything to mean everything, and it's an understanding addict. It wants to understand everything, and if it doesn't understand something, then it'll make up a bunch of stuff and then pretend that made up stuff is true so that it can understand what it wants to understand. So the ego is problematic. It's not inherently either good or bad. It's just part of the human being. And so learning how to live with that authentically, again, it's a process for people. But when they work through that process, what they find is that then they're just more freely able to be themselves without the constant internal chatter and criticism, and it frees up their heart to be open, that people become more compassionate, people become more authentic, they become more present, and then they're less prone to adopting belief systems or falling for bullshit or mythology, and letting go of a lot of spiritual and religious ideas so that they can just be present with reality. And then it's like you get to see behind the mask, that mostly there's a mask in front of them. And, like in my sessions with people with 5-MeO, for me, it was always like kind of this game, like I'm waiting for the masks to fall. And like, there it is. I just saw you, and then they're like, and then the ego comes back. Oh shit, he just saw me.
He saw it.
Yeah. And then nurturing that and encouraging that is like, actually, you can be that all the time. And it can come through the mask of your ego. Because another metaphor that I use is that the ego is like clothing. There's nothing wrong with clothing. Sometimes it's cold and you want to wear clothes, and sometimes it's nice and warm and you want to take them off. And that the ego is like that, but it becomes rigid and solidified for people, and they can't see, how could I be differently? Whenever people experience problems in their life, they usually experience the problem again and again and again and again in this format and then in that format, and the same patterns repeat themselves, and they get caught in these loops and they don't know how to get out. And so here, if you can just completely take yourself out of that context, and again, that would be the non-dual experience, then it helps put things in perspective, and then you see where actually a lot of this has been my choice. I wasn't aware of it, but I chose to limit myself in this way. I chose to be this way. And so this is a big part of what I talk about in being human, that really this is a process of learning how to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah, I always try and kind of think of it as kind of like a self-auditing sort of tool. It's a kind of
Yes.
something that takes you out of yourself so that you can see yourself and you can see all these kind of stagnant patterns and the things which just become petrified within yourself. And yeah, and it gives you that sort of kick up the arse. But I think where a lot of the sort of confusion comes from is that people sort of think that is the work, that is the thing, you know, the glass of ayahuasca, that's the work, or the shot, or you smoke the 5-MeO, that's the work. And I think that's what that really is the kick in the ass, and the kind of the work comes afterwards. You know, it's like if you're lost in the woods, then it's kind of, it gives you, like I say, a kick up the ass, gives you a sort of a map and a flashlight, but you still got to do the work to find your way out yourself. So I think that's where I see a lot of people getting this kind of like I say, this spiritual inflation, or this drive through spirituality, just because they sort of don't necessarily fully process the experience, but they've done it, so they've ticked the box, and then it's like kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah, feet up, I'm enlightened.
Yeah, I had the ceremony. I went through the ceremony, so now I'm done. And and it doesn't work that way. But even within that, like within entheogenic liberation, it's all written from the perspective of working with 5-MeO DMT, but I do lay out that actually there are energetic tools that you can apply to your work in the psychedelic experience that actually makes it more likely that you can process stuck energy and be less likely to be within the structures of your ego. So there's work to do in the psychedelic session, and then there's plenty of work to be done afterwards itself. And that especially, I mean, this is where just, for me, red flags go up whenever someone's like, oh, it was such a beautiful ceremony, and I love the ceremony, the prayers and the songs, and that makes me, a better spiritual person. That's where I was like, no, you've really missed it. You've really missed the mark. And that is just more propping up of the ego. So I think that there's preparation work that you can do. There's work you can do in the psychedelic session. And then there's also work that comes after that. And then there's work of going back into the psychedelic session again and doing more work. And then there's more work, and there's more work. For myself, I wrote my memoir, Being Infinite, to really lay out for people, like, this was my process. This is what I went through. And again, emphasizing it was a process. It wasn't just one event here or one event there. And what I found for myself, that during this time period in 2008 and 2009, which really started with my first full 5-MeO experience, that then I started going to the local Santo Daime ayahuasca church, and I was going 2 or 3 times a month and drinking ayahuasca, and then going back like once a month or so to the Temple of Awakening Divinity that was serving 5-MeO DMT. And then I was also doing work on my own with Salvia Divinorum. And honestly, it was like going to graduate school in a sense, where one experience built on the next. And then also there was lots of breakthroughs that were happening without any psychedelics, where my energetic state was changing in normal day-to-day reality. And then the line between tripping and not tripping, it just got blurrier and blurrier, and then it dissolved away. But again, the key word is it was a process. It wasn't just one event, or especially, when people think about, oh, well, I got this download and I got this insight, and yeah, that's what I needed. And I'm always really skeptical of that kind of thing. It's like, look, like for me, the only real insight that's worthwhile is your God. And if you really get that, then it's about, okay, well then how do I like actually actualize that in myself and actually be a full human being? That I like to refer to humans as God toddlers. And that I'd like
godless, mate, godless. You missed a trick there.
Yeah, I'd like us to be more adults with it. And the attachment to ritual and ceremony, that for me, it's just a big turnoff. And that because it's,
do you think is there any place there? Do you think? I mean, do you sort of like totally dismiss the sort of the traditional thing, or is it like you can do, go to the, say, like, through the 5-MeO process to get that sort of non-dual experience? But is it something you could enjoy, where like, oh well, that's just to enjoy like a beautiful, let's say, ayahuasca ceremony or something like that? Or is this just a kind of a relic now, and that all the attention should be here?
Well, I think that there's room for all of it, but I see ritual and ceremony as kind of a stepping stone. That for a lot of people, what ritual and ceremony does is, like if we were to compare it, to like the 1960s when Westerners were kind of rediscovering psychedelics, that it was sort of a free for all. It was all done for hedonism and self expression, and people were taking acid, going to a Grateful Dead music show, and they had lots of positive experiences, and people also had a lot of really negative experiences
Yeah.
and difficult experiences. And so then there's been this emphasis on not psychedelics. We want them to be entheogens. So we want to treat them sacredly. And that can, and even now, there's a lot of people in their 60s and 70s who were active in the hippie era, who took a lot of acid or mushrooms then. And now they're going to ayahuasca ceremonies and, they're saying, oh, now I'm treating it as sacred medicine. And it's really shifted my experience. And so it's just a trick to get the ego to take it more seriously and to look at it as there's a potentially sacred result that I can get from this. And so the set and setting has shifted. And for some egos, because, taking psychedelics is scary. It's unpredictable. You never know what you're going to get. No matter how many times you've taken anything, it doesn't matter. Every time is fresh. Every time is potentially, oh shit, like this is the one. Oh, I've really done it now. That feeling is always there. And by ritualizing it and ceremonializing it, it gives people a sense of a context and a container. And there's rules and behavior. You do this here, you don't do that.
It's like a safety net aspect to it, isn't it? It's like a safety sort of. The framework provides a kind of feeling of familiarity for, and you kind of feel like, oh, it's not quite as out of control as what it might be because we're inside this kind of this bubble of the ceremony sort of thing. So I think what you describe it as a stepping stone is very appropriate, because we, like most of us in the West, we come from probably the atheistic background that you and I sort of both have, or at least a very low belief background. And then to get from there to like, holy shit, like, what is going on with existence, then I think that ritual element, it does sort of, like I say, allow people to get from there to there, because some people can no doubt go from there to there, but I think for most people it's that gradual slide and through ritual, I think does have a purpose.
Yeah. That, then when it came to me, like actually serving 5-MeO to people, that by that point, I was like, look, I'm just totally done with ritual and ceremony and all of that. That for me personally, to engage in any of that would be inauthentic. It would be like, oh, I'm doing this to make the person feel comfortable or to convince them something. And it's just like, I just stopped doing that. Like, I'm not going to do that. That's, just as you say in writing the book, I'm just really straightforward. I'm really blunt. It's like, boom, this is it. Okay. So, I tell people, okay, you're here. We're going to take 5-MeO, DMT. You're God. Okay. I'm going to help you with that, and we're not doing any ritual. But some people, that it helps them feel safe. But other people, it's important to note that some people are really turned off by it. And so then it actually shuts them down some. And so this is also something that I encounter a lot in my consultations with people, where they say, well, I went to this ayahuasca retreat center, and then they made me put something up on an altar, and they made me read a prayer, and I just wasn't into it. And so then for some people, they play along because they don't want to offend the facilitators, or they don't want to offend the other participants, but then it becomes an inauthentic experience for them. So it's not necessarily helpful. And also, in a lot of these contexts, the facilitators aren't maybe even themselves really experienced with the non-dual experience. And then when it happens to someone, so this is another thing that comes up a lot of times with people in my consultations, that they've been to an ayahuasca center, but they had a non-dual experience. And that then their facilitators and the other people who were present, they don't know how to help that person process it, because they're actually unfamiliar with that territory. And they say, oh, well, let's say some prayers, or, let's smudge you with sage, or let's, shove some hape up your nose, and that they're not really equipped to deal with someone who actually has gone all the way into this experience, because ayahuasca is beautiful and powerful. I love ayahuasca. It's great. But it's not 5-MeO DMT, and it's not, in most instances, 99% of the time, it doesn't give people access to a full non-dual experience. So then in the rare instance where it does happen, in a ceremonial context or in a shamanic ritual context, people don't know what to do with it, and that they end up feeling isolated within that. Mm-hmm. So there's a place for it. I think it's a good introduction. But also, like in entheogenic liberation, I say, well, if you really are going to live as a liberated person, eventually you're probably going to let go of your spiritual or religious beliefs in those communities, because you see that actually a lot of it is a game of projection by the ego. And that the more liberated you become, the less you want to play illusion games. Like, games are still fun, because we are intelligent, sensitive, creative beings, and we like playing games. But when you start to become aware of this smell of bullshit, it becomes more and more adverse. And you're like, I just don't even want to be a part of this, because there's too much illusion taking place. At least that was my experience. Yeah. And so I use myself as the model. Again, I'm not coming from any particular tradition or school of thought. I'm just coming from my own experience. Like I went to the ayahuasca church for like a year and a quarter. And on the last time that I went, it was just so clear that I was done with it. I mean, I just knew I'm never coming back. I'm done. This served me, but this usefulness is done at this point.
Is that where like a lot of the kind of pushback sort of came from? Was it from the people who kind of really hold on to that sort of traditional view and just, again, didn't like your sort of rejection of it?
Well, to some degree, yes. But also, I mean, this is kind of what I'm referring to here, is that I was going through a process when I was participating in the Santo Daime Church. And no one there understood what that process was, because they have a lot of beliefs in spirits and entities and things like that. And so people kept asking me, like, well, what spirits are you working with? And I would tell them, like, it's just me and God. And they're like, whoa, they didn't know what to make of that. And I was going through all this energetic reconditioning, which from the outside perspective, they thought maybe I was possessed. I mean, I even had a guy like try and do an exorcism on me once. I was standing out in the forest. I was standing out in the forest on a stump. Like, you're not supposed to leave the space, but I couldn't stay in there. So I was standing on a stump outside in the forest. My hands were up and vibrating, and I'm throat singing, because I'm just embodying this energy coming through me. And this guy comes up with sage, and he starts saging me, and he's saying all these prayers. And inside, I mean, I'm just laughing, because it's like, dude, you have no idea what's going on with me. But anyway, after I left, and that was in 2009 that I left, and then I wrote my book, Being Infinite, my memoir, in 2014. At that point, so I had kind of a buddy where we were, in the Santo Daime Church, they place you often by height. And so there was a much older gentleman who's around the same height as me. And so we were almost always standing together in the back. So we were kind of like Daime buddies, where you're not really supposed to interact with other people at a Santo Daime work. But we were kind of Daime buddies. And then I sort of disappeared from the church. And that he ended up reading my memoir after I wrote it in 2014. And then he ended up coming in doing several 5-MeO sessions with me. And after his first session with me, he said, I have something to confess to you. I was like, oh, okay. And he said, none of us understood you at the Santo Daime Church. And we all thought that you were really, really weird. And now I've read your memoir, and now I've just had this experience with you. And he's like, I get it. And I'm so sorry that I ever thought that you were strange, or that I didn't understand you, or that you were confused, because I see now that actually you were going through something that none of us were prepared to understand. And
Wow. Oh, awesome. So,
well,
there's a couple of sort of things I just wanted to sort of just run through a sort of a kind of checklist, because like I mentioned at the beginning, there are some sort of extrapolations from this non-dual thing into some more sort of extreme beliefs. So, okay, I'll just put these to you, and I'm just trying to suss out what your stance here to sort of separate out the baggage from like non-duality might have accumulated. So from what you said, I think I know your answer to this. But so you do think that sort of there is a physical plane of existence then that we are occupying at this moment. Yep.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. And would you say, is this physical plane, is this existing as as part of this kind of the universe, as part of the what you might call is God, but whatever it is, there is all of it. There's a physical, there's a conscious, there's the divine, whatever you want to call it, but it's all here. Yeah. Okay. So it's not like the other kind of what I'm getting at here is that no one person is manifesting existence. Like you are not a figment of my imagination that I'm just manifesting to talk to me or are you?
No. No, that I definitely am not solipsistic in that sense. And also, I do not take the position that you, quote unquote, create your own reality or that you manifest your own reality. Honestly, my take on that is like, thank God. I mean, it would be such a mess if each one of us could just manifest our own reality. Because we're just God toddlers, and that would just be a total disaster if reality actually worked that way. The only thing as individuals that we really have any kind of choice or power over is our reactions and choices, and that's really about it. But we are okay. So I call God is the all-being, and the all-being is playing all the characters simultaneously. So we're all really here. Like, your body is different from my body. You are not a projection of my mind. And because this happens a lot with people on 5-MeO DMT, where they think like, oh shit, I'm dissolving and I'm going to take all of reality with me. And like, thank goodness it doesn't work that way. No, that was just you and your perspective. There's no one of us. See, because every little bit of reality is God busy being that bit of reality, and that God cannot violate itself. So even though the glass of water is me, this is also God being a glass of water all on its own, independently of my perspective of it. So there's nothing I can do about that. I could drink it if I want. I could throw it at somebody if I want. I could water the plants with it if I want. But I can't just like, I will dissolve this reality, or, no. We live in a regular physical system with all the rules and regulations that go with that, so that we can have a coherent energetic structure through which biological life can evolve. And so, yeah, the physical world is the physical world. It's an illusion in the sense that we participate in subject-object duality, and that most of the time I don't experience the glass of water as actually being myself. But because I've had enough non-dual experiences, I know that it actually is. But I still get to experience it as a separate object. So it is kind of an illusion, but it's not just an illusion. And that's a big one that sets me off when people say, oh, reality is just an illusion. My answer is, yeah, but it's still reality.
Yeah.
It might be an illusion, but it's still reality.
Yeah, and I think people get sort of very caught up in the sort of the illusion simulation kind of words, because everything I'm seeing now is a simulation. My brain is clearly simulating something, but that it's not quite the simulation that you think it is, sort of thing. It's still here. There is a refrigerator. There is a table. There is a me. I mean, do you sort of take that any further, or do you have any kind of opinions on the kind of the concepts around, we are the universe experiencing itself kind of thing? Like, is there do you have any, like, is there a purpose to us, or is it just that we are here and that's just that?
Yeah, well, when people say we are the universe experiencing itself, that's generally people who are afraid of using the language of we are God experiencing itself. But yeah, so the universe is God. God is the universe. These words are synonymous,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Um, and yeah, we are God experiencing itself. And actually, my feeling is that at the heart of it, it is because God is the infinite energy of unconditional love, but as the only thing that exists, that love is actually self-referential. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a form of self-love. And the thing about love is that it actually desires an object that it can direct its love toward.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the manifestation and the evolution of the physical universe is the act of God loving itself, so that then it can eventually, over billions and billions of years, evolve itself into sentient life forms that can interact with itself and then also love itself as love another being. And one of these catchphrases that I have is that everything's better when you can share it with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you find new music that you like, it's like, oh, I want to share this with someone. Or a new television show. The first thing is, I text my friend, oh man, have you caught this new show on Netflix? Like, this is great. Everything you love, you want to share, because because love is open, love is
Mm-hmm.
sharing, and that this is God's sharing of itself so that it can share with itself. And that, I think that's the ultimate purpose of existence, is not just so that God can experience itself, but so that God can love itself through all these myriad forms.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of putting it, mate. I've always kind of leaned towards this idea of that, it's what we are here to be a human being, and I think this kind of it kind of conflicts a little bit with the people who I think go a bit off the rails on the psychedelic path, who just want to spend all their entire time in the transcendent and just sort of again get sort of lost in the thing of I can do this, I am manifesting reality, and I'm always trying to ground it in, well, whatever it is going on, before I was born or when I die, I'm having a human experience, and I want to have the best human experience I can. And if I spend my life, just sniffing my own farts and dribbling at the wall about how transcendent I am, then I'm not doing my job of having this human experience. I'm not taking advantage of what was given to me. So yeah, I always sort of try and, that's what I used to kind of ground things back to me, is like, what can I do with this experience, these things? What can I get out of the non-dual experience, or any psychedelic
Yeah.
experience? And
Yeah.
if it's just sitting there, like I say, ignoring my kids while I sit there and bask in my own, like in my own reflection of godliness, then it's kind of, I don't think it's served a purpose. Then it's got to enhance this life somehow.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I always go back to saying, look, the whole purpose of all of this is just learning how to be yourself authentically as
Mm-hmm.
the human being that you are. And, I always say that, look, you were God as a human being before you realized you were God as a human being. And then afterwards, you're still just a human being. So this doesn't come with any magical powers or psychic abilities, or I'm just going to, when I'm going to float off into the universe. It's like all of that. This, because the only thing that wants that is the ego, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
is not about inflating the ego. This is not about turning you into some super spiritual, magical person who, has all these amazing abilities. That I say, look, all of your abilities as God, as a human being, you've had them your whole life. You've just been mistaken in where you've put your full attention onto your identity. That's what shifts. That's what changes. But like back when I was doing sessions with people, because I'm very good at being in the energy of the experience, because again, that's about being authentic, about being present with what
Yeah.
actually is. I can't tell you, like, so many of my clients afterwards, they would ask me, like, so you're psychic, right? That you have psychic abilities. Because they literally thought I was reading their minds, when actually I'm just feeling their energy and
Yeah.
just looking at what's presenting itself, and then I know what's going on. But from their perspective, it's like I must be psychic or something like that. And I always tell them, it's like, psychism isn't real. I've never met a genuine psychic. I am not psychic. I'm not a mind reader. I don't have any of these abilities that you think I have. I'm just being present with what's happening. That's all. And even another area that's kind of funny is, because I give a lot of talks and a lot of interviews and a lot of presentations, and people are familiar with my face and they're familiar with my voice. Something that I get on a fairly regular basis is messages from people saying, you instructed me in my dreams last night, or you were in my psychedelic experience coaching me along. And they want to know how it was for me. And I tell them, it's like, look, that is just your internalized representation of Martin. That was not, I was not involved in that, but see, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this is a place where if my ego wanted to jump on board, it could be like, right. Yes, I am showing up in your dreams and visions and I am instructing you. Yes. Very good. Please come sit at my feet and I will teach you my wisdom. But I always tell people, like, no, that's just you. It's not me. But it's not me personally.
Isn't that tragic though? I mean, what you just described, that you sit there, you guide someone through one of these experiences, and then what you really do, you're just acting like a present human being, and that is so otherworldly that you have to jump to this conclusion, like, wow, you're psychic, you're mind. It's like, no, we're just connecting. This is just humanity 101. And that's what's kind of like, it's actually mind-blowingly sad, that we can be so disconnected that we have to jump to these kind of like crazy conclusions.
Actually, that makes me think of another example. This was pretty close to when I stopped doing sessions, that a woman came. And she was from the Santo Daime church, not the local one, but she had come from California. And she came to do a session with me. And again, in Santo Daime, they put a lot of emphasis on working with spirits, working with entities, being a channel, being a medium. So that's their framework.
Yeah.
And so I did this session with this woman. And when she kind of reintegrated at the end, she's like, I have never seen such presence. And she she said, what being are you working with? and I just kind of sat there, and she looked at me, and all of a sudden you could just see the realization on her face. She's like, it's you.
So like, she's recognizing the sort of the God within you, is like looking back at her. Or?
Yeah, well, she realized that I'm not channeling anything. I was just being myself, and that I am that, and that she is that. And I mean, just the recognition, she was just like, oh my God, it's you. Like, you're just being you, and you, because you've opened yourself up to the infinite being that you are, that you're that right here. And it's not some separate being. It's not some entity, but I'm just being present.
Isn't that just so much more rewarding though than the kind of this has got kind of like blows my mind a little bit with the kind of like the woo woo and the bullshit. It's like the very simple truth is fucking amazing. like it just doesn't require this kind of this stacks of bullshit. Like is it like the experience in itself is just so fucking mind blowing that I just like I say, it just blows my mind that people just need to start convoluting it and twisting to think of things. It's very, very simple, and it's I'm glad to hear you sort of say that it's that's your perspective on it. So
it really shows how addicted to meaning making the ego is. That the truth is so simple that the ego says it can't be that simple. I've got to make it more complicated than that. But the fact that it is so simple is just mind-blowing. And then the ego says, oh, well, I've got to create structures and meaning and symbols and edifices and mythologies. And, I've got to create all this stuff because I can't handle that it's just actually so simple.
Mm-hmm. So I see time's marching a little bit better, so I won't keep you for too much longer. But I just wanted to ask you one last thing. given, I mean, we've talked a lot about the kind of 5-MeO tonight, but I hear you sort of talked about all the other psychedelics. Where do you think it is a good place for someone to jump in here? Then, do you think should someone go from sort of zero to the non-dual experience, or is there a kind of a stepping scale here of a path that you would advise somebody down? Or is it just jump in at the deep end, tie rocks to your feet, and jump in?
Well, really, the honest answer is that it varies, that because each person has their own history, has their own identity, has their own construct of the ego. And some people are ready to jump all the way into the deep end, and other people aren't. And so, I mean, ultimately, it's an intimate question. Like, actually, I have to email this guy back that somebody just messaged me on Facebook the other day. And he's like, I have OCD and anxiety and depression. Would 5-MeO fix me? Or should I do ayahuasca or take mushrooms? And my response to him is like, we actually need to have an in-depth conversation before I can answer that question for you. So that's the real answer, is that really it depends on the person. But I will also say that in my time serving 5-MeO, I had people who had zero psychedelic experience whatsoever who did great. And then I also had lots of people who had done years of work with ayahuasca and mushrooms and DMT, and they had a really difficult time. So, it really does vary. And for some people, going all the way into 5-MeO, it seems to be a beautiful introduction for them. And other people working up to it might be more beneficial. And particularly people, I think someone who's kind of healthy and grounded, 5-MeO is okay. Someone who has a lot of mental or emotional disturbance within them, maybe working with something a little bit milder would be better. And for some people, in my consultations that I tell them, I want to see you go actually work with a therapist, go see a therapist, and maybe a psychedelic therapist, but also someone you can talk to. And then other people, it sounds like they're really comfortable going into a ceremonial setting. And then other people, like we talked about, that they're not comfortable with that. So you got to find the right environment. That who you take it with is always very important. The environment you take it in is very important. Where you are in your life is very important. How within yourself or without of yourself you are, all of that is very important. And so, it can work for some people to jump right into the deep end. What I don't recommend, if you are working with 5-MeO, like some people say, oh, I want to gradually work up to the big dose. And my take on that is this is a waste of time, because you can't dip your toe in the ocean and then think, okay, now I have an idea of what it's like to be plunged into the deep end. That's not going to help you. So I do recommend, if you're going to work with 5-MeO, go all the way. Yeah. But you might want to work up to that before you go all the way.
I must admit, I am always a little bit jealous of sort of the people who do jump in with like zero experience and then jump in, because then you've not got that idea of what's in store for you. And maybe that's why some of the people who have had the years of sort of ayahuasca and stuff, why they do struggle with it, because you think you've got this sussed. You're just like, it's in the bag. I've got my ayahuasca badge. I'm good. Yeah, and then you're like, fuck me. so yeah, when you see like a total newbie jump in, like they don't have that kind of pre-built perception around themselves. They just know they're going to get something incredible is going to happen, and then it does. Whereas, I'm always super anxious going into those experiences, just because it's what's in store for you. You're about to have your psyche sort of annihilated, and it's not an easy one to go into. So I mean, Matt, I'll let you get off there, mate. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this talk, and I think you've explained everything really beautifully. What I'll do, I'll put some links in the description below on your website. But is there anything you want to sort of say in closing? Anything you want to like point people towards, or any sort of events you've got coming up?
Well, I will say, looking ahead, that I'm completely revamping my 2011 book, Entheological Paradigm Essays on the DMT and 5-MeO DMT Experience and the Meaning of It All. I'm completely reworking it. It's going to be about twice as long as it was. And so that's kind of my next project that I'm working on. And definitely, I would say for people who are listening to this and like, oh, I'd like to talk to that guy about my experience, that, I do offer 30, 60, and 90-minute consultation sessions. That would be non-dual and theogenicintegration.com. And that's the level that I work at these days. I definitely do still get a lot of requests to actually do a medicine session with people. And I don't, but I do consult. So I'm always happy to talk to people. So I just put that out there.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your sort of transparency and the clearness of your explanations. And I'd love to speak to you at some point in the future. I've really enjoyed this conversation, mate. So thank you very, very much.
All right. Thanks, Rob. I really enjoyed it.